Let's go! Today we're ranking the SEC coaches from last to first, and everybody has done their power rankings except for Power Hour SEC. Let's get to it. Starting off here with Zach Arnett, number 14. I think a lot of you would agree with this slot. And look, today, if you disagree with anything, feel free to get into the comment section down below. And yes, Zach Arnett takes over for rather tragic reasons with Mike Leach's passing. He has never been a head coach before. He is also a defensive-minded coach, the less important side of the football. So I have my skepticisms with this move. I think they should have just kept him as an interim, as a prove-it kind of thing, but he is the full-time head coach of the Mississippi State Bulldogs, and he comes in at number 14. At number 13, I know there's going to be some disagreement here, but Billy Napier coming over from the Sun Belt and honestly having the win of all wins in Week 1 over Utah in relatively dramatic fashion, just for Florida to go 6-6, and honestly 6-7 with ugly losses to Vanderbilt and Oregon State in the bowl game. You know, some sympathy for that bowl game loss considering everybody opted out, but truth be told, this was a hideous season for Florida in year one. And honestly, Billy Schaub is the coach the offensive side of the football. The one thing I will say is Florida did do the most important thing when it comes to winning, and that is hitting explosive plays on offense. They had no problems getting chunk plays. It's just doing everything else. The turnovers were issues for Florida this year. And more importantly, the defensive side of the football. So they've got to get better on that side. Lots of pressure on the coaches on that side of the football. So for right now, Billy Napier is number 13 after a 6-7 season, and he could be under more pressure than anybody. Moving on to number 12, another coach who most people would view underachieved this year, and that is Sam Pittman. Now, I just did my SEC quarterback rankings, and the guy who he is holding here was my number one quarterback in the SEC. If you want to see that list, that is floating in the top right corner. And look, Arkansas is always going to be in an uphill battle with their recruiting deficiencies, especially in the SEC West. But this season was a disappointment. Now, I know KJ's health really hurt them in some pretty big spots, including the Mississippi State game and him playing banged up versus Liberty. But other than that, this was overall a very mid-season for Arkansas. And now they lose Kendall Briles. They also have to replace Barry Odom, their defensive coordinator. And keep in mind, one simple truth is Sam Pittman got a raise before this past season. And I'm a big believer if you as a head coach gets a bigger money contract, I want to see at least something from the program that shows it's moving forward. This past year was certainly not that. And I think all Razorback fans would agree with me. And honestly, I did it again. I went in the wrong direction. Number 11 here, I went back and forth with Jimbo Fisher and Sam Pittman for this number 11 slot. I could see it either way as well. I know more lists have Jimbo Fisher ranked higher, including on 3's list. They have him at 8. I just don't see how you couldn't have him at 11 after what happened last season, which was an utter disaster, losing to Appalachian State, and just this offense never really getting off the ground. But when it comes to positive momentum, they did blow out the SEC West champion LSU. It looks as if they have some clarity at quarterback. And the one thing that was holding Texas A&M back, Jimbo Fisher's offensive play calling, is something they no longer hopefully have to deal with because he is no longer going to call the plays. That is going to go to Bobby Petrino. And as many of you know, this has been one of my major things for Texas A&M to move forward as a program. Jimbo has to give up the play calling duties, which he did. So I'm going to move on to number 10. This is obviously a little bit of an overranking because you do see some regression in the near future for Vanderbilt. But Clark Lee was the Vegas over-under for Vanderbilt was 2, and he wins 5 games. Now, you would have liked them to be more competitive versus a backup quarterback in a rivalry game versus Tennessee. Getting beat 56-0 wasn't pretty, but they did beat Florida, which is why you see a Gator Lemonade bath. You get that Gatorade. And a lot of blue and orange in the background. What an upset right there. And that wasn't the only one for Vanderbilt last season. So, obviously, I'm not the only one that thinks Vanderbilt is going to regress. They may not get back to 5 wins under Clark Lea's tenure, but let's give this guy some due for what he did last season with scraps. So Clark Lee comes in at number 10. At number 9 and at number 8, I went back and forth. We'll get to number 8 in just a second, but at number 9, I do have Eli Drinkwitz. I am of the belief that Eli is better than the next person on this list, and I know I'm going to get a lot of blowback for that, but still, I think what he did last year was really freaking good. Now, just to toot my own horn really quickly, on Power Hour SEC, this was actually the third video that we've ever done. We actually did an over-under win total video before the season began, and every single one of our picks hit. And one of my biggest picks was actually Missouri going over the 5.5 win total. And yes, they ended up only winning 6 regular season games, and they did, like Florida, lose their bowl game. At least they were semi-competitive in the bowl game. But their win total was at 5.5, and they barely cleared it. But you have to keep in mind, this was a team who had Georgia against the ropes, a game that they probably should have won. This was a team that lost to Auburn because their really good field goal kicker missed a chip shot, and they couldn't hold the football through the end zone. So their season was actually better than what their record indicated. So at number 9, I have Eli Drinkwitz, and remember, he returns his quarterback, Brady Cook, who has some low-key, really good dual-threat ability. And this next guy is the guy that I went back and forth with Eli Drinkwitz. Today, if you were to ask me who would I want to lead my program moving forward, Mark Stoops or Eli Drinkwitz, I would pick Eli Drinkwitz. But for right now, because Mark Stoops beat Drinkwitz last season, I don't think Eli has beaten Kentucky just yet. Mark Stoops gets the number 8 spot. But I do feel Mark Stoops is a little overvalued as a coach. Yes, we can get into a debate about Mark Stoops and everything he's accomplished. They've only had 4 double-digit winning seasons in the history of Kentucky football. Mark Stoops has 2 of them. What they don't tell you is his last 10-win season, there was not a single win on the schedule that they had over a team with a winning record until the bowl game versus Iowa, and I felt that game was a very lucky win for Kentucky. So Mark Stoops, I think, is a really good coach, and he's done a really good job at Kentucky, and no one could argue to the contrary, but I do see him in a downward trajectory, and out of any SEC list, we have Mark Stoops the lowest, and I would actually, today, I would rather have Eli Drinkwitz to lead my program over Mark Stoops, and I can make a case for a few other people that are lower on the list. At number 7, this was a guy I kind of wanted to put number 5, but he has not coached an SEC game in years, and he is under an immense amount of pressure, and that, of course, is Hugh Freeze. I love this move from a football perspective for Auburn. We can get into a morality debate with Hugh Freeze all we want. But the bottom line is he can really coach football, and I love what he did with his 2 coordinator hires. I like the fact that Cadillac Williams, a rising coaching star in the profession, remains on staff at Auburn. This was a home run if you put all the other stuff to the side. Now, once again, me personally, not really a fan of Hugh Freeze for a lot of different reasons, but the guy can coach football and generate explosive plays. Boom! I'm looking at you. Yes, you right now. So, I hope you guys consider subscribing and ringing the bell. We're on the road to 2K subs. You can also drop a super thanks to help grow this channel. Coming in at number 6, if this was a battle for who has the best social media account, he would be number 1, but Lane Kiffin at number 6, obviously 2 years ago, giving Ole Miss their first 10-win season in forever. Last year, starting 7-0 and ending the way that they did was really rough. And look, I will say this about Ole Miss football. You give them a lot of credit for what they have done up to this point under Lane, but last year, the way things ended was very hideous, and as many of you know, that schedule was backloaded, okay? So The Kentucky win early in the season, you can argue, was Ole Miss's best victory. And look, there was a lot of luck involved, especially in that last-second Kentucky drive, but they were able to get the W there. But, I would have liked to seen them be more competitive versus LSU, especially after the great start that they had in that game. And just the lack of adjustments in some of these games, some of the coaching decisions, you could kind of feel that Lane maybe was distracted by the Auburn rumors or whatever the case may be. Lane Kiffin, though, his offensive schemes, he is one of my favorite play callers in all of college football. You see other offenses take some of the things that he does and apply it to their offense, and it works. I am a big Lane believer. And look, we can argue the Alabama game as well. I'm going to post a video in the top right corner of your screen. I thought that there was some interesting calls against Ole Miss in that football game. I understand this is probably going to be the most controversial spot of anybody on this list. And you would think with what Lane and Mark Stoops has accomplished, both of them have had double-digit win seasons for the first time in forever at their respective programs. But I'm going to talk about peaks and valleys, right? Shane Beamer's 2 wins at the end of last season are as good as any win that anybody in the SEC had last year. Blowing out a very powerful Tennessee team in a game that Tennessee absolutely needed, and doing the same thing, obviously not a blowout, but in a big rivalry spot versus Clemson. That is nothing short of incredible. Something else that I do want to point out about Shane Beamer is, while it may not look as impressive when it comes to wins and losses, Shane Beamer every season has to play Texas A&M from the SEC West. Now, I understand A&M this past season wasn't really all that, but you take a look at what Lane Kiffin draws in his cross division. He plays Vanderbilt every year, and Mark Stoops plays in Mississippi State. So, look, I think Shane Beamer's schedule is just tougher, especially if you compare it to what Mark Stoops has had to go up against. So, I like what Shane did last year. Yes, there were some ugly spots, especially that blowout loss to Florida, but a stat that we share all the time, not only here on Power Hour SEC, but on my major channel, Power Hour LSU, is back-to-back road games are brutal historically in the SEC. More on that in just a second. But that was the back end of a back-to-back road game versus Florida. Still, you shouldn't get blown out that bad by a mediocre Florida team. But truth be told, to flip around and have the 2 victories that he had, yes, you would have liked to have seen him pull that out versus Notre Dame, but that was a game that they were very competitive in. I like what Shane Beamer has done, and if you can't see his coaching talent, whether it's Beamer ball with special teams, whether it's coaching Spencer Rattler up, who I still think is okay but not great, I love what he has done up to this point in South Carolina. I am putting Josh Heupel at number 4. I was very close to putting him at number 3, and we'll get to number 3 in just a second. So, Josh Heupel is special. What he did last year, beating Alabama for the first time in forever, was nothing short of incredible. And you could argue one of the more impressive victories in the SEC was going on the road and bludgeoning LSU the way that he did. Yes, Tennessee had a bye week, an early bye week before that one, but that was such an impressive victory, especially knowing now that LSU ended up being the SEC West champions. I mean, Heupel's offense has just revolutionized everything. Their recruiting has gotten better. NIL is something that's moving along swimmingly for Tennessee. And look, there's going to be a lot of questions about the future of the defensive side of the football. And now the offensive side of the football, you lose a Biletnikoff winner, you lose Hyatt and Tillman, and you lose, obviously, Hendon Hooker. And, look, it's going to be tough sledding moving forward for Tennessee. Not only that, losing Darnell Wright, who I think will be the best pro out of any of those 4, and, losing some really good defensive pieces. And you had to deal with the Jeremy Banks situation last year. So, look, this is a guy that I might pick to lead my program over anybody in the SEC with his creative offensive schemes. So I'm going to put Josh Heupel number 4, and he was very close to my number 3 pick, which is Brian Kelly. Okay? So, look, it might be my LSU bias that puts BK over it, or it could be that Brian Kelly and the Josh Heupel seasons actually were very similar, right? Bowl victories in blowout, semi-blowout fashion to close out the year, an ugly road loss that should have never happened. They both had those late in the year. They both had close, thrilling victories over Alabama for the first time in years. It was very similar seasons, and the one thing is that they did play head-to-head, and Tennessee blew them out. And keep in mind, Tennessee is the reason why LSU ended up winning the West inevitably, because they were the ones that ended up beating Alabama. So, it's close right here with me for Brian Kelly and Josh Heupel. I love me some Brian Kelly, though, and what he had to do to clean up the mess left by the previous regime in year one. This was his very first year. I just think overhauling the roster, and look, I understand I'm the LSU guy. I am going to have a lean towards my guy over the other, but I'm going to be honest, it is really close, and one thing I did weigh in when it's really close was head-to-head competition. I did that with Mark Stoops and Eli Drinkwitz, and I'm not actually going to do that here. So maybe it's some of Brian Kelly being the winningest coach ever at Notre Dame and him being an overall accomplished coach. Obviously, Josh Heupel is the better X's and O's guy, and he actually does call plays. But I still will go Brian Kelly at number 3, and he very well could be the number 3 coach in all the sport. At number 2, I'm just going to go ahead and say it's Nick Saban, okay? So, look, it's either Nick Saban, Kirby Smart. We'll go ahead and show you number 1. I think it is hard to go against a back-to-back national championship winning head coach. Now, over the last 2 years when they've played each other, the series is indeed split, right? Because Alabama won in the SEC championship game and Georgia won in the actual national championship. And, of course, last year you had everybody complaining Alabama wasn't in the playoff even though they almost got in, and, Georgia didn't have to play Alabama. But truth be told, Georgia beat the brakes off of both the teams that beat Alabama. And let's be honest, Alabama had a lot of close game luck last year. Yeah, they lost to Tennessee. Yeah, they lost to LSU. Close games, grand total of 3 freaking points, or 4 freaking points. But the truth is, they had a lucky win versus Tennessee. The Ole Miss game was a game that was very competitively played. The Texas A&M game came down to quite literally the final play of the game. So Alabama had more close game luck than not last year. So Georgia, who didn't really play in a whole lot of close games, yeah, they had a ton of luck to beat Ohio State. And look, they had that rough performance versus Missouri, but I cannot state this enough. It is so hard in this sport to repeat as national champions with all the first-round selections, all the NFL record draft selections that they had the year before. Yeah, they returned a quarterback. Yeah, they returned pretty much all their coordinators, except Lanning went to Oregon, but, Schumann fit in just fine. This was the best coaching job of anybody in the college football playoff era to go not only back-to-back, but going undefeated in the final game of the year. So let's keep it a buck. If you win back-to-back national champions, yes, there is still your mentor out there who has 5 more national championships than you. College football is a what have you done for me lately sport. And some of this is who would you build your program around now? And I think the answer to that is Kirby. What I'll show you here are some other lists you're looking at on 3's list and how they had it. Here is Bruce Feldman's list. The number to the right is the overall national ranking of these programs. And this is Stuart Mandel's list. And moving along here to Brad Crawford at 247 Sports list, okay? And while I didn't do a list of a national list of top 25 coaches, I do think these men have some of these coaches way overrated, right? I don't understand how Mike Gundy's not in everybody's list. Jonathan Smith at Oregon State is a guy that I'm higher on than most, but obviously we just focus on the SEC. I am higher than most on Shane Beamer, lower than most on Mark Stoops, and maybe Jimbo Fisher. It just depends. Billy Napier. But let me know what you guys think in the comments section. Okay? Now, floating in your face in just a second is my SEC quarterback rankings going into next year. And I hope you guys consider dropping a super thanks. It is Power Hour SEC. Bam! And tonight, we are doing lasagna. Let's go.